Bonjour, bonjour. And I see we have quite an international audience this evening. Welcome to all. My name is Dr. Krista. I'm the Chief Science Officer here at the DNA Company. And this evening, this afternoon, whatever your time zone might be, I have the exquisite pleasure of welcoming Dr. Stephanie, a PharmD, and someone so very well versed in this space. So I'd invite her right onto the screen right away because I'd love to start chatting through Dr. Steph. We won't need to concern ourselves with too much of a welcome. The audience knows you well. Why don't you kick us off with a little bit of a story around your experience with cancer? Because I think that lays the ground beautifully this afternoon, this evening, this morning for the conversation that we're going to be having. So welcome and share.
Well, thank you. Thank you. I'm so excited that everyone's here tonight, and I'm so excited to have such an important conversation about prevention. Because as many of you may be aware, I was diagnosed with cancer at 21. And, anytime you get that C word, first of all, generally you're not expecting it, but then it's like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And people say all the time, even to this day, I'm so sorry that that happened to you. And I tell them it was the best thing that ever happened to me, especially because it happened so early. And I was able to make lifestyle changes that I didn't know I needed to make.
Yeah.
And I so wish we'd had the DNA company back then, that I didn't have to do so many decades of trial and error, where now your blueprint can be handed to you. But I'll tell you what, at 21, I was told I either had to change my lifestyle, or I was bone marrow transplant, 3 months girl in the plastic bubble. Many of us are old enough to remember a movie called The Boy in the Plastic Bubble. That was going to be me, and $1 million worth of medical debt. I was too Scotch Irish and just too cheap to go through a bone marrow transplant and $1 million worth of medical debt. And so I said, there's got to be another way. Do I have other options? And there was, and it was nutrition and lifestyle medicine.
And sorry, I just want to make sure I'm clear on this. Was that other option initially presented to you, or were you kind of presented with, here's the medical route, here's another route, or just the medical route?
I was presented with the medical route, and then I had a chief resident, because I was at a teaching hospital, who said conspiratorially, he had been raised in India. His grandmother was an Ayurvedic practitioner, which is the folk medicine of India. And he said, outside of his attendings, you don't need all this medicine. You just need to change your diet.
Yeah.
Okay, resident to resident. Great. How do I do that?
Yeah.
And he goes, I don't know. Go find yourself a little nutritionist. And this is what I remember.
Yeah.
It was this dismissive, I'm not going to discuss this non-Western medicine alternatives, but instead just figure it out. But just know that I know it's the answer, but I'm caught in this web where I can't present it to you because he was sent to the US to be a real doctor. So I did exactly what I was told. I went and found a little nutritionist. She was 4'11". She was 82 years old. She kicked my butt and saved my life. And so tonight we want to talk about some of those prevention and resolution. If you've been diagnosed with cancer, if you're worried about being diagnosed with cancer, if you want to know, do you have a choice? And or might you see that in the future?
Yeah, because hold me honest here. I think about the World Health Organization has said approximately 80% of cancers are preventable in the sense that they are not inspired by this gene that if you have this gene, you're gonna get cancer, right? There's an element, and we're still understanding what that element is, but an element of control where most of the cancers we're seeing are not necessarily cancers you have to or you're fated to develop. Is that a fair statement?
It is a fair statement, and I'll give you an example.
Yeah.
I carry the celiac gene,
Mm.
and my father carries the celiac gene. Now, my mother carries a non-celiac gluten intolerant gene.
Mhm.
My father has had colon cancer, so he was a wheat farmer. For any of you who don't understand celiac, you cannot have gluten, which comes from wheat, rye, barley. Okay.
Yeah.
So he was a wheat farmer. He was exposed his whole life. He always had GI issues.
Mhm.
Okay, but they were not associated with celiacs at the time. Again, celiacs can be misdiagnosed if you just look at the gliadin antibodies up to 50% of the time. So he was told, no, you don't. And then he did develop, and he had to have 17 inches of his colon cut out.
Ooh.
I carry the celiac gene and a non-celiac gene. I keep up with my bowel health and all of being strictly gluten-free, getting regular colonoscopies, getting biopsies. And though I carry the gene, I have great bowel health and I've not had cancer. I had one polyp. I went 10 years early. In the US, they recommend at 50, you have your first colonoscopy. I had mine at 40 because of familial history. We'll talk about family history and what that means with your DNA. But we caught a polyp that my gastroenterologist said it takes 10 years to develop adenocarcinoma, and I was 5 years in with that polyp. It was good that I did prevention because I too would have had cancer, but I was able again to beat that.
Yeah.
So I've had the cervical cancer and I would have had colon cancer.
Yeah.
I also went to the dermatologist this week. I have long sleeves on, even though we're going into summer, because I looked like I had a fight with a feral cat. Because I'm fair.
Your metaphors are very vivid. I love it.
Thank you. And I get prevention. So I go twice a
Yeah.
year to have spots that could develop in.
Yeah.
And that's why the prevention is so important. There
Yeah.
are ways you can control this, and there's tons that you can do on your own, and then some that it's good to get some help with.
Absolutely. And I wonder, before we dive a bit deeper into your story, if the powers that be can pop up onto the screen our intro poll. I'm really curious with our audience, where our audience is coming from. So we did ask, how of our audience who's been diagnosed, who's had that diagnosis, that very scary C word enter their life, and 30% of our audience has. Next question, a majority of people here being concerned, 70%. I think that's, if anything, that's a lower number than I would have expected. I hear the concern around the C word quite often in practice, but what drives the concern to me is very interesting. And we're seeing a happy split here, right? So we are definitely seeing some family history, right? Often see people, oh, my mom had it, therefore I'm concerned with. A lot of environmental exposures. I think this really speaks to the intelligence of our audience here, because I don't often see this kind of at the top of people's lists, right? Previous diagnosis, understandably, lifestyle choices, and other. If you're amongst the other, please do toss it into the chat box, because as we continue this conversation, we want to make sure we're capturing what else has you concerned about this development. Yeah, so Dr. Steph, continue this story. So you go to this 4 foot nothing woman, she whoops your butt, and talk to me a little bit more about that experience of getting your butt whooped. Because like I would imagine that's a big mental shift to go from you're gonna have to live in a bubble and here's all these extreme things you have to do, to kind of putting an undertaking, uprooting your life, right? And shifting that. Talk to me about that experience of uprooting your life, but also the benefit that you saw from that. Because I can imagine, you sitting here today, it was more of a benefit than just cancer prevention.
Sure. So, a couple different things. Hippocrates says, never attempt to cure someone until they're willing to remove from their life the cause. Now, I want you to let that sink in. Never attempt to cure someone until they're willing to remove the cause. So in my case, I called myself a vegetarian. I was 21 years old. I had cervical cancer. So let me tell you how that happened. I had a lot of allergies growing up. As we know now, it didn't then, that's gut health. My allergies were treated, they didn't treat them as allergies. I had 2 weeks of getting sick, antibiotics, 2 weeks of being sick, 2 weeks of being well, and then it would repeat. I would get 8 to 9 rounds of antibiotics a year, destroyed my gut.
Yeah.
So I grew up in rural America, and so we ate very local seasonal foods. My family were farmers, so we ate things, off the farm. However, we were wealthier than most because my father had gone to college, so did my mother. My mother was a high school teacher and then a college professor. My father was a captain of industry in the food industry. So we got to do the packaged foods and the TV dinners and the fancy, things. And so we were exposed to more of those than most were. But I called myself, by the time I got to college, a vegetarian. Now, this is not a knock against vegetarians because I wasn't a vegetarian. There were no vegetables in sight. I'd grown up with all of that stuff.
Mhm.
And I wanted nothing to do with it. I was a desertitarian. I was a dairyitarian. I was a breaditarian. I was a pastaitarian. Yeah, I had a bumper sticker on my car that said, "Eat dessert first. You never know when the world's going to end." So it was
And then
all
your world ends
sugar.
with this big C.
Yeah, it was all sugar, carbs, and processed dairy. Now, I eat dairy now, but I didn't know back then because I didn't have my DNA. Now, I don't process dairy, but I only eat raw dairy and I only eat local A2 dairy. And I eat very little, but I take colostrum on a daily basis, which has done great things to rejuvenate my gut.
Yeah.
So I am strict gluten-free and I don't eat processed, pasteurized or homogenized dairy products because I can't break them down. I take lots of enzymes. And the interesting part of that was when Sal, who was my nutritionist, didn't have that DNA blueprint, and didn't at the time have a lot of combination options. I took 143 pills a day.
Girl, more pill than
Some
he
people
at that
said,
point in time.
how do you have time for food? Because every meal was a handful. Now we have our black label products like the DNA company offers, or these blends, and we can do these great smoothies. At the time, none of that was available. It was, I took B12 and B6, and we didn't even know about methylfolate then, or and I'm also MTHFR. So I took separate vitamin C and separate enzymes, and it was 143. I also was on a severely, severely restricted diet for 2 years. But the beautiful part of that was my purpose was bigger than my problem. Okay, so let's talk about cancer. Many people here tonight have said they've had cancer. If those who've had cancer knew the best way to get rid of your cancer was simply to restrict what goes in your mouth, it's that or chemotherapy, that or radiation. Which would you choose, diet or radiation? Celiac is the most controllable form of autoimmune disease or inflammation based on that. I decided nothing tasted as good as feeling good felt. But I became a rabid advocate for testing because it was that early testing, even though I was shocked, that saved my life. And because of all the allergies, because my gut was out of whack, I had frequent yeast infections, not urinary tract infections, but yeast infections. In fact, I had an oncolytic, it's a cancer doctor, oncolytic gynecologist, who at one point, I'm like, I am so miserable. I am so miserable. I had a yeast infection for 9 months straight. And at the end of this 9 months, he does a swab. And he was, at the time I was in my 20s, he was in his 40s. He said, "Girl, you got enough yeast in there to open your own bakery."
Pull the celiac out, of course.
Now, humor can take care of all sorts of misery. I laughed so hard and he just went bright red. He was like, "Oh my, I shouldn't have said that. That was inappropriate. Please forgive me," because it was a delicate matter. But,
Yeah.
no amount of antifungals or yeast medicine could take care of it because I kept feeding it. And that's what you've got to understand. How do you stop feeding the beast and turn your body around? And it's all gets back to biochemistry.
Yeah.
And that's one of the biggest things that I will say basic pharmacists and basic physicians have forgotten is their biochemistry. And that's one of the beautiful things that DNA does, is it shows us where we have our breaks, and we
Yeah.
can build bridges by
Yeah.
building that biochemistry bridge.
Because I think you're the core definition, right, of what cancer is an uncontrollable replication of cells, right? Uncontrolled such that these cells no longer serve their purpose. There's too much, there's too many, they become space occupying. They do all these things that effectively clog and disrupt the body.
Mhm.
But the tricky question always behind that is the why, right? And we're starting to understand some genes that enable that consistent replication. But the other side of this equation, and I think this is a lot of what you're getting to in regards to I had this infection, my biome was off, my diet wasn't good. It is what is the environment or the landscape of the body that gets those cells to a point where they are no longer in control, right? And we're learning over time there's not one smoking gun, there's several. And a lot of those happen to be diet and lifestyle.
Right,
Fair?
right,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah, which is sometimes a difficult message to hear because I'm looking at the chat and there's a lot of people in a part of tonight's webinar right now that either they themselves or a loved one is undergoing this, right? And I really offer this sincere commentary right now. This is not, we don't say this to the end of blame, right? When you were 21, you did not know better, and so you couldn't do better, right? The goal of this is teaching to do better, right? The goal of this is, wherever you are right now, how do we get you to a point where you're able to advocate and do better for yourself? Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, you
yeah.
don't know what you don't know, and you rely on professionals, and sometimes they don't know. My doctors
Yeah.
didn't know. This one doctor did, but he was at his position and his station in his career, not willing to open his mouth about it because he thought he would be chastised. So,
Yeah.
sometimes we talk in hushed tones. And fortunately, there's more and more information, more and more
Mm.
accessibility. And guys, this was 40 years ago. I'm in my 60s now.
Yeah.
And so the beautiful part of that is I've had 40 years of practice. I'm hoping that my story can give you hope and that we can shorten your, learning curve and give you tools so that you can advocate for yourself. And then we're here if you need help with that too.
Yeah. I love what you just spoke to in the sense of not all doctors are able to keep up, right? So when I was in my internship at school, I did an adjunctive cancer care shift, and I wasn't sure you never know what you're getting into, right? And I walked into it not really knowing what patient to expect, and I noticed two different things. I think one of the biggest debilitators behind care and like finding wellness were people who sat on either end of the extreme a little bit too much,
Yeah.
right? So there were a group of people, and I don't know why they were seeing me if they sat on this extreme. I'm a licensed trained naturopath. Um, they would come in and be like, I am just following a conventional plan, independent of what happens. But my wife, my partner, my someone has roped me into this meeting. I'm not really going to listen, but I'm here. And the conversation there, was never necessarily around let's investigate what treatment, right? Those people aren't ready for that conversation. But instead it was, well, let me talk to you about studies, sincere scientific, like, you can find them on PubMed that say adjunctive care insofar as understanding your nutrition better, understanding your environment better, understanding these things will promote and support those outcomes. They actually make conventional care better,
Mhm.
right? Which is so important. If you can make conventional care better, why on earth would you not? Through diet and lifestyle, right? And then the other tricky extreme were people that categorically refuse conventional treatment, right? And again, there's personal choice, and I think that's really important. If you choose not to engage in that, good for you. But if you're choosing not to engage in it simply because you reject a system of medicine, that's where the trouble came in. Because again, there's certain cancers where conventional medicine is absolutely what needs to be happening. And then most diagnoses are probably best served in a space somewhere in between,
Mhm.
right? And I think the trouble of that is when you are given this big C word diagnosis, there's a lot of fear and a lot of, I don't know how to navigate this wealth of information, and learning to advocate for yourself in parallel to being diagnosed and having this big C word now on your chest. That's
Right.
a lot to ask of anyone, right? That's so very much. And I found the people who successfully navigated their diagnosis tend to be the people who are advocates, could hear both sides of it and marry together what was best for them. And it sounds to an extent that's what you did, in the sense that you didn't dump conventional medicine, you partook in all the screenings, but
Mhm.
you also investigated the other side of, how do I use my diet to
Mhm.
change this and turn this around?
Well, and that's exactly true. And I think that's why my practice has survived 25, 30 years,
Yeah.
is because I had Western trained with a doctor of pharmacy. I had a board certification in clinical nutrition.
Yeah.
And then I worked for pharma for 10 years. So I could see the inside of pharma, and I promoted and all of that kind of thing. But then I found in my life and with my children that, yes, I would take them to the pediatrician, but I wasn't so pro that every sniffle got antibiotics, because I knew what antibiotics had done with me. So I used sambuca, elderberry flower. I used echinacea golden seal. I made homemade chicken soup, and they call it Jewish penicillin. Well, it works wonders because of all the nutrients that are in that real bone broth. Now bone broth is all over the place and collagen is all over the place. But eating foods that are fresh and seasonal and rainbow, limiting processed foods, those should be snacks, not every day. Now, I will tell you, I hold pharmacy licenses in 3 states. I practice a little bit of basic pharmacy still, just because it helps me keep fresh, and it's good to have a name in the community. It used to be, in my case with the yeast infection, we had a 7-day cream.
Mm.
Came out with a 3-day cream. Then they came out with a 1-day. I never really was an advocate of the 1-day, but they had a 1-day suppository. Now they still have those, but the bugs have grown so sophisticated and the diets are so synthetic that most people say, I've tried it, they don't work. So now they have a tablet, fluconazole. It used to be 1 tablet, 1 time.
Mhm.
Now it's generally 2 to 3. Well, I will tell you, I have now seen in the last year people having a month,
Yeah.
and then we've gone from a 100 milligram tab to a 200 milligram tab because there's so much yeast in people's systems.
Yeah.
And the thing that says to me is, when I will say, look, this is not a cure, this is going to help knock it down, but you've got to get below that. And you've got to get to the point where you stop feeding the yeast.
Yeah.
And I'll say, what sugars are in your diet? They're like, I don't have any sugar. I don't add sugar to anything, but I drink Dr. Pepper is my favorite, but I drink sweet tea,
Mm.
but I have grits every day, but I have pizza on Friday. And I'm like, okay, a starch is a long string of sugars. So everything you've mentioned so far is sugar. Are you aware that a soda can or a pop has 11 teaspoons of sugar? If our audience doesn't know that, every 4 grams of sugar is a teaspoon. I want you to take a soda pop that is 42 grams of sugar and put 11 grams of sugar or 11 teaspoons of sugar, mix it with some water and drink it. That's what you're doing with every one of those pops. So sugar causes inflammation. Inflammation causes those cells to go crazy, just like a kid that goes crazy on a sugar high. They replicate incorrectly. That misreplication, that misfiring causes the damage or the bad cells, and then they proliferate. At the end of a cell, we have these little fingery wavy things called telomeres. Regular cells, the telomeres with each replication die. And at the end, when there's no more left, apoptosis, or the cell dies. Cancer cells, the telomeres keep going and they go crazy and they multiply out of control. So we've got to remove the offending agents, be it toxic metals, be it a toxic environment, volatile oils that are like, I love the smell of a new car, but it's really, really horrible for you. you know?
Listen
I
City of
mean,
branding and marketing, because they spray
yeah,
that. They like accentuate that smell in there.
right. And, that is completely toxic. And people don't realize toxicity can come in a biological form, an emotional form,
Mm.
an electromagnetic form.
Mhm.
So we've got to look at ways that we can neutralize, but it really helps if you've got your blueprint to know. So I don't detoxify well. So while I love perfume and I love some of those, I limit my exposure and I make sure that I have a very natural form. I don't use antiperspirants. I notice when I get done with all these, even though I have fun doing these, that I pit out terribly. But I don't use an
Yeah.
antiperspirant. I use a deodorant, but I use a natural
Mhm.
deodorant. In fact, I just found a fabulous non-toxic one that, I keep playing with them. It's actually out of Canada. So those of you who don't know, Krista's
I
from,
know which one you're talking about, and
is
it's the
it
only one
super
that,
deodorant?
oh no, I use her.
Oh, it's called super deodorant and it is a bentonite clay and some other, you guys need to look up super deodorant. It is really cool. We need to get, okay, Tracy, we need to get a DNA code to get an affiliate on that because,
I will work on it, doctor. No problem.
okay, it is really good.
Routine's
Oh,
another.
they are the key, and they're all non-toxic ingredients and it will hold you for 2 to 6 days. And I know, serious. And it comes in this teeny little tin, but I love it. I love it that I don't have to worry. That's one step that I've made that
Yeah,
I can go. I don't have to worry about that. Fine, I'll pit out. I'll just
yeah,
change my shirt afterwards.
yeah.
But there's lots of things like that. And I know I don't detoxify, so I can't put aluminum on.
Yeah.
As you know, my family has a history of dementia. My father right now is currently dealing with a lot of that and Alzheimer's in that part of the family. And they've linked that a lot to aluminum toxicity.
Yeah.
So I don't put aluminum on. And these are the things that when you don't detoxify, when you have estrogen toxicity, I love hormones. I love, all the female hormones, but I've got to be careful and I got to get myself tested. So I'm a major advocate of testing and knowing the right testing, and then taking that data and applying it. I think a lot of times people are afraid to test. And in my practice, what I find is some people say, I'd rather not know. So they just put the blinders on because then I have to deal with it. Well,
Yeah.
I'm the exact opposite. I'd rather know because then I can deal with it. I'd
Yeah.
rather go down with a really mighty good fight than,
Yeah.
do just not. And so what I want to do is offer to people that information is powerful and you have a PhD in you, but you've got to take action on knowing that, here's my vulnerabilities. It's just like having a pothole. If you see a pothole, you drive around it. Okay. So where are your potholes and how can we help you guide so that you don't have to hit them and blow a tire?
Yeah. Yeah. And I like in particular that you've offered yourself up in a very demystifying way of you don't have to do everything perfect. You just kind of have to figure out where the biggest bang for your buck is going to
Mhm.
sit. You just heard her, I like perfume. I wear it occasionally, but not all the time because it doesn't work for me,
Mhm.
right? It's that element of this and that. I in my practice at least, interestingly, I see a lot of people kind of with heads in the sand. I see the flip of that as well though. So in particular, people who have a family history of cancer who now sit around petrified that it's coming to them. I wonder if we can talk a little bit around, it's one thing I think to do all the lifestyle things, which let's be plain is 80% of the cancers, that's how you're going to nip them in the butt.
It is.
But for that 20% or for those that have that history, have that horrible, just the heart-wrenching experience of having to watch someone go through it, right? Or know it's kind of that thing in the back of their mind. Let's talk a little bit about proactive testing options that people have, because I think this part of the conversation is really important, in particular to quell kind of the monster that can live at the back of your mind of almost that's waiting and anticipating, which, as we know, we often talk about how thoughts influence the body. We don't want to be marinating in that fear and those thoughts of maybe or when will I get. Let's talk through all things testing. Where, when do you suggest people start doing that sort of cancer prevention testing? I'm not talking annual screens. I'm more talking very specific to cancer.
Well, I think the best place to start is family history. So if I look at my own, we have the colon cancer history, we have breast cancer history, we have skin cancer history, and we have, with me, the uterus. So colon was started early. Now that there are tests out there like liquid biopsy and CGX and some of these other things, I would say if you've got people in your 20s and 30s, now I've got kids that are in their late 20s, and I say, some parents want to look at your prospective spouse and see kind of their bank account or their educational background. I'm like, could care less.
Different of a
I want to see their DNA. I want to let you know what you're going to look for. I want to have tests so that you know what your odds are of different things. So I would start it if it's a very strong familial history, heart disease, cancer, that is a easy kind. I would start in the 20s for sure. And then I really love some of the new testing that the DNA company is doing, because I think the leadership of the company has really responded to our core clients saying, give us more. I mean, we started with just the DNA test and gave a lot of education about it. And then usability so that they could act on it. But people said, well, now that I've got all this and I want to act, what's my next step? We now have the PGX. So you can look at what drugs, including chemotherapy drugs, are going to work best with my DNA and work best in my certain form. I love that. I love that it's like we don't have, yes, each cancer has like 2 or 3 protocols, and those are the ones they've seen to be the best, but what if your DNA doesn't respond to that? Or what if one is going to be optimized? So I love that we have that. I love that we have liquid biopsy, and maybe you, because you're so good with the kind of technical, you could go into liquid biopsy, what that actually means, and how, but I love this too, because I've actually already seen 2 or 3 people who have gotten huge heads up, and they're going to be able to head things off at the pass that would have been really scary and deadly.
So the concept so remember, just to kind of ground us, cancer is not something that all of a sudden you have. It's something that grows, right? We create an environment that it can grow within. And then it takes time for those cells to go wonky and out of control and to build and kind of form a mass if it's a tumor, like a proliferation if within the blood. Okay. So the idea is this does not happen overnight. The idea is that over time, if you have the right technology and you're asking the right questions, if you're taking the right test samples, you can actually, in theory, see cancer develop over time. And this is kind of the founding concept behind liquid biopsy. Okay, so what it is it's a serum sample, it's a blood sample. And the idea is that as cancer is growing within the body, right, not all those cells are going to stay attached to the tumor, right? Some of them are naturally going to break off because the replication is happening so quickly. There's a lot of waste. A lot of things are going to fall off, right? If you're building a house on sand, every once in a while it's going to collapse, and some of that collapse is going to go into the blood because the blood is that highway where you clean stuff up. So when you take a blood sample, not only are you getting all of, everything else that is within the blood, we test for blood cells, we test for vitamins, all that fun stuff that we test in the blood. You can also get a sample of all this cancer debris. Okay, so what a liquid biopsy effectively is, it's scanning that sample of blood, and quite literally it scans everything. The nerd in me, the technology person in me, my mind is blown that quite literally it captures every single little piece of DNA in there, right? And a majority of this DNA is going to be your own, right? It'll be a cell from your kidney. It'll be a cell from this, right? Those cells, when they get old, they have to be gotten rid of. So most of that is going to be you. But some of that, and again, they're going to sequence all of this DNA and they're going to compare it against a library of, we know that this DNA is associated with various cancers. So we have a library that says, if you're showing with this DNA, there's a high likelihood you have colon cancer developing. There's a high likelihood you have breast cancer developing. So it takes every ounce of DNA within that blood sample, compares it to the library, and we get a report that says, of these 16 very well documented from a DNA perspective, very well-known cancers, do you have any evidence of that in your blood, i.e. something has fallen off and it's in your blood now? And separately, how much, right? How much of a concern? I think it's something we need to be mindful of when we see tests like this. Cancer comes up every single day in our body. That does not mean you have cancer. Most days, your body is trained. We have evolved to be able to identify cancer and say, not today, and stop it. So, right. And so this test takes that into account, right? You see a singular cell of breast cancer with absolutely no history and nothing else of concern. Does that mean you have breast cancer? Absolutely not. But does it mean maybe you want to follow up in a year? Sure, maybe, right? All of these results are, you don't take them just at face value. You're going to be sitting with an oncologist who can properly interpret them. Because this again, and I think we spoke to kind of the advocacy and the integration of information is where medicine is going. This test by itself does not stand alone, nor does your clinical history stand alone, nor does the oncologist sit alone. You have to add, layer all of these things together, right? To lend to this picture of where it is. So what that liquid biopsy again is going to do, scan blood, tell you this is what we see in the blood based on your medical history, based on how many DNA strands we're seeing. This is maybe how much you want to be concerned. And the oncologist that you meet with who helps interpret these results is going to say, here's some ideas around next steps. Maybe you want to get some imaging done. Maybe you want to talk to this person and do this sort of investigation, right? We're not going to leave you alone with a test that says, yeah, good luck. We see some evidence of cancer, but have fun, figure it out yourself. We'll walk you through those next steps. And I think that's really important because, again, we have to shift away from this idea that all of a sudden cancer is there to this idea that it develops and we want to catch it earlier in that development. So to your point, in your 20s, you flipped it around, right? You're not walking around with cancer today. Is that true? You're not walking around with cancer. We want to nip it in the butt such that the diet and the lifestyle things can be brought in and whatever other options medical technology has can be brought in. Did that preach? Did that make sense as a summary?
No, that makes total sense. And I really love how you talked about the individual strands and then say, we've been able to test enough people and we overlay, this was this was this, and then we saw down the line, those that had this developed this, those that had this did not develop this. And it's the more data that we gather and the more we group that together that we're able to gain information. And that's really, whether you're testing your DNA or whether you're doing a liquid biopsy, you're gathering data and then you make your best educated guess. And that best educated guess, until it's confirmed by something else that's diagnostic, is what you go on. And it's like, okay, this could lead down, but what can I do to cut that off and change the course of that? And again, all cancers are inflammation. So I want you to all say, well, where does inflammation come from? It comes from stressful lifestyle, the wired tired, burning your adrenals out. It comes from lack of sleep. It comes from poor quality food. And even if you eat a great diet, in fact, I was reading in some of the chat that there was a 17-year-old daughter who's still having problems. She eats a whole food diet. She may eat a whole food diet. However, not all whole foods are created equal for each body. So like I said, You know, I can have raw dairy, but I can't have processed dairy. I need to have A2 dairy, not the other. I cannot have any wheat or any gluten. I got a little lax and I allowed a little cross sensitivity and I developed a cough. And I was like, oh, it's just allergies. Oh, it's just back from colonoscopy, did an endoscopy. I had esophagitis. Okay, so that means my esophagus was inflamed. I had gastritis. That means my stomach was inflamed. I had duodenitis. That means my small intestine was inflamed. So, you know, but because I had gotten cross sensitivity and I'd gotten a little lax because I had been, you know, so clean for so many years, I'm like, a little bit won't hurt. Well, guess what? They wanted to put me on proton pump inhibitors. I bet a lot of you have either been suggested or you're on proton pump inhibitors. So as a medical researcher, proton pump inhibitors should only be used for 6 weeks. I know people who've been on it for 6 years. You must have acid in your stomach. Acid in your stomach is how you break down and digest your food. If you're not digesting your food, it's rotting. If it's rotting, you're getting inflammation. If you can't process a lot of your minerals, then you get mineral deficient. If you're going to let parasites and viruses and stuff in, because that it also destroys them. So when I travel internationally, I take extra hydrochloric acid and I take extra digestive enzymes and I eat them at each meal so that I don't get traveler's diarrhea or bring back parasites. So they wanted me to be on proton pump inhibitors. And I said, no, I don't want to take that as a first line. One, I want to clean up my diet. I will refuse to do the cross sensitivity, anything that could be potentially, even French fries in a mixed fryer. Don't do those, okay? And what happened is it took me about 1 to 3 months and then was retested. Guess what? My inflammation's gone. But I also did drinking liquid aloe vera. Aloe vera is massively detoxifying. I also drink greens, you know, microalgae greens. So I can use natural anti-inflammatories. I also take turmeric, which is curcumin. So I did all this natural inflammation, cleaned up my diet, tightened back up, because nothing tastes as good as feeling good feels. So guess what? Cough went away. Inflammation went away. I didn't want esophageal cancer. I didn't want stomach cancer. I didn't want colon cancer. Okay, super. It's all good. So life ebbs and flows, meaning you could be super strict and then you're just like, I've had enough of it. You know, I like a 90-10 rule of, you know, if you are tight in 90% of what you do, you should have a birthday party. Now, in my case, I have to be 100% with the gluten. I have to be. But can I have a drink? I can. If I want to go to a party and have a drink, can I have some sugar? I can. I had a gluten-free bundt cake the other day because one of my employees found out she's pregnant, you know, and so I was like, well,
congratulations to her.
Yeah, she's a sweetheart, real cutie. But it was like, but those are not daily. I don't daily treat. They're called treats because they're used for special occasions. They're not a daily. And again, with our DNA, when we look at emotionally, I'm not emotionally attached to food, but there's a lot of people that are. Okay, so if you understand that that's one of your triggers or one of your coping mechanisms, then let's look at some other things that we can do to help you with lifestyle changes, cognitive behavioral therapy, or maybe even adaptogens that can help soothe that beast so that you don't reach out to something that could hurt you and lead to chronic inflammation that can lead to something like cancer.
Yeah. And I would offer to the audience, I think I want to start shifting very gently into questions and answers soon, because I see quite a few talks. But I think sometimes I hear sometimes from these webinars, or sometimes when I see people, you know, they'll come in for these big complex things and they're like, oh, you're this fancy genetic scientist and you're doing all these fun things, and yet you're sitting here telling me to sleep and eat better and to relax, right? And a lot of people don't expect that advice because I'm doing fancy things. And, you know, I can imagine there's some people in the audience tonight who are like, I came here to talk about cancer and she's telling me to eat vegetables. I would really, really offer that through a lot of study, small studies, over time, these sorts of interventions are shown to decrease rates of cancer. And while it's not sexy advice, while it's not advice that per se is even easy, right? Shifting the way you live to incorporate vegetables is there's going to be a learning curve. Let's be honest about that one, right? It's not the sexy advice everyone wants. That's like, here's this pill and this fun, crazy thing. You jump off a building and you'll be fine, right? It is the tried and true advice, you know? We're not trying to sell you a crazy gimmick here. We're trying to sell you some, well, encourage you on some vegetables. We have unfortunately no vegetables to be sold. Granted, if you talk to Steph, she might send you some from her farm. Alrighty. So I wonder if we could jump into the chat. I'm gonna go to Emily's question first. So Emily is going to be 47 in a few months. Happy birthday, happy almost birthday. She's speaking that she personally has a relatively rare form of cancer that was diagnosed in 2022. It was all accidentally found, so happy incidences of when imaging yields good results. And she also found out at that same time, probably based on like some proactive testing, that she has some genes, mutations of PALB2, which will increase risk of certain hormone-influenced cancers. She says that she's seen her family, members of her family pass away, which is just a harrowing experience unto itself. Okay. She goes on to say that her hormone report from us, the DNA 360, shows she's co-dominant with an increased likelihood towards estrogen toxicity. She's asking if we have any suggestions from a lifestyle nutrition perspective to help support better outcomes. And I want to offer just like, I mean, let's speak to breast cancer, hormone influenced cancers in general, but thank you, Emily, for the question, because this is, I would imagine there's many females on this call where this sits close to home and this sits close to what on earth can I do to prevent this? Yeah. Steph, do you want to give the first go at this?
Sure. And there's a couple of things when I see this. You know, a lot of people think the appendix is a useless remnant organ. And more what we are learning is this is almost a little farm where our probiotics and our multiple different microbiota live. So anytime, and there's a ton of evidence now that microbiome health, whether it's on the skin, in the gut, or throughout the body, is going to be critical. I would look at your genes to see, or I would look at how is your microbiome. Now we have a new DNA company besides our DNA 360. We have a new microbiome protocol, a gut thing. I would look at your microbiome because when you had your cancer and your appendix, that says to me that maybe you have a depleted microbiome and that could lead to other things. So one of my friends happens to be Zach Bush, and Zach was a triple board certified physician who actually studied and made oncolytic drugs, so cancer drugs. And one of the favorite things that I heard him talk about is that he took a sample of breast tissues of the microbiota of the breast, and he found 50 pathogens in there. And he's like, oh my gosh, no wonder this breast has breast cancer, because there's 50 pathogens. Look at all this invasion. Now, being a good researcher, he said, well, I guess I better test a healthy breast. So he tested a healthy breast, and he found it had 500. And he went, oh, my conclusion was completely wrong. I thought this breast had so much breast cancer, or breast cancer because it had so much microbiota, but I found out it was depleted. So I would look at your microbiota, one thing. The second thing that I would look at with the estrogen toxicity and your hormones is I'm betting you don't detoxify. So again, as Krista mentioned earlier, it's detox, detox, detox. Now, some people, they spend their whole life detoxing. I don't think that's healthy either, because you can become massively depleted. So it's a matter of how do we keep those detox pathways going regularly so that you're constantly flushing, and then how do we come back and test to see what are those levels. if you've watched any of our hormone webinars, you will know one of our favorite tests is the Dutch test that will show which pathways do your hormones go down, so that we know, are we going down a toxic route or a non-toxic route? And to what degree are you missing a pathway, or can we add something in to drive it down the right pathway? So I would look at the DNA test. I would look at a gut biome test. I would look at a Dutch test. And then I would work with a practitioner to kind of put them all together later and say, what is the right system for me? And knowing that what you think about, you bring about. They've continually seen people who have cancer lock themselves in a room, watch a bunch of funny movies, and they come out without cancer. When your brain focuses on something, neuropeptides get produced. Those neuropeptides bathe your cells, and those bathing of your cells create a memory and a biochemical response. If everything is a fear response, if everything is a panic response, my grandmother used to say that worry is just praying for disaster. And because you send all these stress signals, okay? So you've got to find a way to pull yourself, whether it's an exercise, whether it's meditation, whether it's prayer, whether it's just plain old gratitude, whether it's just laughing. We've got to have a mindset that goes, okay, I've got some information. Right now I may be a little overwhelmed, but I'll get through this. Put your support team together, whether it's family or close friends or survivors, and, then it's attack it. Just eat the elephant one bite at a time. But, it sounds like you are doing some of that. It sounds like you have jumped in and you're being proactive. And I really, commend you for that. And we're here to help you if we can.
Absolutely. Yeah. I like that messaging too around mindset, because there's such a wealth now of information that speaks to how stress and thoughts will feed into the gut in the way that the gut actually supports the biome. It's not just kind of this biome happens and then feeds up. The brain will literally send signals down to the gut to say, let's support this, let's offer this nutrition, let's do this. And so even thinking can shift, right? And stress can shift what is going on down here. There's such a bi-directional relationship between everything. And so I think it's neat and daunting to an extent. I think working with someone and supporting thought patterns can be a very good thing as well. Because I think, I hate when, whenever I go through a moment of stress and someone's like, oh, just calm down. You just need to relax. And I look at them, I'm like, thanks, you just made it that much worse. So I would offer, sometimes working with people on that can be very helpful, and talking to someone in particular, given everything that you've gone through and you're trying to undertake, right? I think a tricky thing I see with a lot of folk in post-care and aftercare, right? In inactive disease, right? They get lost in the C word and they forget to live outside of it. So sometimes getting someone to help you reorient and live a life that is not just dedicated to cancer prevention is important. Yeah.
I'm also a real big advocate, and I wasn't as much of this until my father has gotten ill with his dementia. But I was all into, I'm living to 100. Both of my grandmothers lived to 94 and 93 independently. And, one of my grandmothers, man, she was nasty. She just could be mean and feisty. She wasn't happy unless she was ticking somebody off. She literally drove down to play bridge. She loved to play bridge. She played 3 days a week. And when she came out from one of her bridge games, her car had crashed and it knocked over a pole. And all the little ladies she was with was like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. Somebody drove your car and knocked over the light pole. And she goes, oh, that was me. And they're like, when did that happen? And she goes, well, when I arrived, the button went wrong, meaning she hit the accelerator and not the brake, and she popped the curb and knocked the pole. And they said, well, why didn't you tell us? And she said, because I knew you ninnies would worry about it. We wouldn't get to play bridge today. Well, I got to tell you, she ended up hurting her leg. She had to go in a rehab hospital, and they said, we're going to put you into a nursing home to repair, which would have been just short term, and then she would have transitioned. She thought it was a nursing home and she thought she'd never get out. The day that they were going to transfer her, which was a Tuesday, Monday night she died. She said, over my dead body will I go to a nursing home. And she willed herself to not wake up. And she was just that feisty. But there's quality versus quantity. So I just knew I would live to be 100, and I may still, but I only want to live to be 100 if it's quality. Because watching my father in his late 80s now, so he's 10 years younger than his mother, and he's not happy, and he doesn't want to be here, and to go, the things he's experiencing aren't pleasant for him, aren't pleasant for my mom. And I go, I would rather, with this whole thing of cancer, there's a wonderful saying about, when I come to the end of my days, I want to screech in, going full tilt, and jump off, used up, worn out, and say, baby, oh, what a ride. And whether that's 22, 42, 72, or 102, the whole goal is healthy, sustain, and then, just like my grandmother, just don't wake up that next day. And I'm much more for quality living than quantity, because this chronic aching that I see in people, whether it's pain management or recurring disease, where they just debilitating, uses all of their life force and all of their resources, that's not a living. That's not living.
Yeah, I think Bryce speaks often about this being the quality of your health span as opposed to your lifespan.
Yeah.
And really trying to reorient and focus on the health span of that, because those are the years that you have happy, healthy, vital, and wanting to be engaged with the world. So maybe if the powers that be could put a link into the chat so that people can access that webinar, because we did have several conversations around how do you optimize for health span.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea.
I think that's really important, because I think too, part of the conversation that we really haven't had tonight is there's a group of people on this chat who have cancer currently, or are watching someone with it, or have it as part of their history, right? And prayers be, hopefully this group of people get into the space of inactive disease, right? So with cancer now, just for everyone's awareness, we're not really talking around remission anymore. We're talking around inactive disease. So a period, usually 5 years after, not depends on the cancer, where there's incredible vigilance of tracking that cancer and ensuring that it's not recurring, ensuring you stay in inactive disease. There's this humility to an extent with the word that, you want to be mindful and do what you can to prevent it. Right. And I think that vigilance is so important for those 5 years and after the fact. Right. But I would also offer, I often see people in that time kind of get sometimes lost in that diagnosis, and learning how to come out of that and learning to reclaim life, and a life that isn't dedicated exclusively to a lifespan, to a health span, coming out of that and learning to incorporate healthy habits in a peaceful way into your life, so that you're living your health span as opposed to living your health habits in fear of recurrence. I think that's really important. And
I actually had a client who had cancer, and then went into remission and, inactive disease, and was doing their annual checkups. And beyond 5 years, their oncologist said, you really don't need to come back anymore. To which he said, yeah, I think I still like to. At 14 years, the doctor banned him and said, no, you're looking to get sick again. I need you to stay healthy. And the more you ruminate on this, the more we'll go in the wrong direction. And to this day, that client has not recurred, but had spent so much energy on that, and all the fear around it, and all that, and finally was able to shift. But it took his oncologist putting his foot down and saying, I will not allow you to come back anymore, because you need to live. You need to stop being prepared to die and start living.
Yeah.
So,
And there's a fine balance, and I'm curious in the future, especially as we get data around this, if things like liquid B can be to a supportive end, where, instead of kind of this hyper vigilant focus around, I must offer all my energy and effort to it, it's a once a year test every 6 months, depending, there'll be different advice around the frequency there, but allowing some of the testing coupled with peaceful, healthy habits to kind of guide that aftercare and reduce some of the fear, just like it might be able to reduce some of the fear who have that family history and are looking not to have that moving forward.
Right.
Yeah. The aftercare and learning to live again is so very important, because I think with cancer on the rise, in particular early onset cancer. So for the audience, early onset means a diagnosis under the age of 60. It's uncommon. It's year after year for the past 10 to 20 years, depending on the cancer. Those rates are quite quickly increasing. So we're seeing more and more cancer diagnosis in younger populations, and in particular, a lot of aggressive ones within like females who are in their 30s for hormone related ones. It's going to
I
become
think
more.
one of the things that we haven't addressed, and one of the things that people need to be aware of, is these electromagnetic frequencies are very critical. We're now all in front of, our cell phones all day, and we're in front of computers all day. And we live in a box. We go outside to get into a smaller box that we call a vehicle. Then we travel to a box to work. And then we're in, and there's artificial lighting and artificial, all of the EMFs and the toxic from the new carpet smell and the paints and the lights, and you don't realize your cells vibrate. Your cells have, this natural vibration. I want you to think about water. Water has multiple different forms. When it vibrates very little, we call it ice. When it has kind of a natural flow vibration, it's called water or liquid. When it has a very excited flow, it's called steam. Okay. So it's the same substance, but it depends on its vibration as to how it shows up. Your cells do the same thing. And your cells, when you're around next to computer towers or in electronic cars, or now with 5G, I am actually not a 5G fan, because those are very short band waves, but they penetrate through things. Our cells are getting this disruption. I want you to imagine the old radios. And if you had a rainy day or a stormy day, everything was real staticky. You couldn't hear. Okay. Well, our cells get that. And when a cell, the vibration gets out of whack, then it can get a wrong signal and it can duplicate wrong. I think a lot of the reasons younger and younger people are having cancers and cell replication that goes out of whack is there's too much electronics. There's been so much to be said for grounding. Get your feet on the ground, get out into nature, move.
Yeah.
That it's really critical that we learn to unplug and de-stress, because, this go and everything electronic, our bodies weren't meant for that.
Yeah. And I think the tricky of it, I think the population-based studies that will ever be able to correlate 5G to whatever, whatever it might be, those are not going to materialize for a really long time, because this is all, we're a petri dish right now of experimenting what it might be. But there are some really interesting cell line studies that look at the impact, the cellular disruption of what happens when various biochemical processes are exposed to that sort of energy. Are they halted? Are they stopped? And so while that will not definitively say, does 5G give cancer, right? We're not going to get to that level of study for several decades. So it does very basic cellular functions. Yeah.
But we
So,
have to use common sense
and something I think
we
very
don't
worthy
know.
of.
And because we don't know, let's err on the side of
Yeah.
caution, which is moderation and mediation.
Yep.
We just went through 4 years of hurry up, and there's been all sorts of fallout from that.
Yeah. Now I wonder if we can flip. We have someone with their hand up. So powers that be, I wonder if you can bring Connie forward and enable her to speak. Connie, often people are going to have to hit unmute before they can talk as well. So just keep mindful if your mic is allowing you to speak too.
I didn't really have any questions. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Oh, okay. I guess that was just a mistaken hand. Any?
So there's a couple other questions. Are you gonna jump back into the?
Let's jump back in here. All right. So I'm seeing I think there's two themes between the questions. I'm getting some questions around various thoughts of mammograms. So I wonder if we kind of talk to mammograms and imaging there. And then also, it's a little bit of a tangent, but there's some questions around PPIs and how people can wean off of PPIs. So I wonder maybe we speak to the imaging first, and then you and I can share our favorites when it comes to weaning off a 5 or 6 or a 7-year unchecked prescription of PPIs. That's one of those. I met someone that had been on them for more than 30 years. I was just like, I didn't even know they'd been around for 30 years, let alone. Yeah, but let's do imaging and then we'll jump to the shock of PPIs.
So I do think imaging is good for mammograms in short bursts. I like thermography, which is not radiation, because that will show hot spots, that'll show concentration, that will show if there is a need. It is kind of a non-toxic. So you've seen kind of the multicolor rainbow where it's like red is hot, but blue is cool. And so you can look at the lymph glands, you can look at everything and see, is there an area of congestion? Congestion can be inflammation and then progress from there. So that's one option. I do get mammograms. I had very dense breasts growing up, and so they called it fibrocystic breast. I had my first 3D mammogram 2 years ago now, and I was super, super clean, super, super clear. Because I test my estrogen and I make sure my estrogen levels are good as well as my detox is good, I have decided to go out several years. I don't like irradiating healthy breast tissue every year. Now, I'm sure a lot of oncologists and radiologists would say you got to have an annual, but if you have clarity, and you have a 3D, which my radiologist said this is model. I rarely see anything this clean. Interestingly, because I do lymphatic massage and because I've cleaned up my detox pathways, my fibrocystic breast disease has gone away since I've been on BHRT. Now I have very clean, very clear, and so I will do it once every 5 years. I'm okay with doing it every 5 years as long as I can do the 3D, because you can see so much in there. And again, it's a series of a lot of little things that you do that add up to more things. What about you? How do you feel about mammograms?
I sit in a similar way. I think the advice is almost personalized as to what is truly the risk history around it, right? My advice based on that is going to be different. And I'm also very mindful too of other forms of testing that are out there that can further educate how sincere is the risk. So liquid biopsy is one of them, right?
Yep.
It can be a form of, hey, we're starting to see something develop, maybe now instigates some of that other imaging. Separate to that, there's companies, and you can message us if you're looking for a suggestion, that do things called polygenetic risk score. So without getting too fancy, really what current efforts, especially with big data, are doing is they're taking a lot of females who have breast cancer and they're scanning their DNA. And so they're looking at kind of that in the sense of, where are the comparison points? These people who have had breast cancer, what are the genes that they have similar? They're trying to break out of this concept of it's just BRCA, it's just this gene, and looking at different SNPs and commonalities there. So taking one of these tests can further educate what is the true genetic risk outside of kind of the very sexy BRCA genes that everyone focuses on, but really we know aren't the real story. So I would also take it a step back when you think of what is the appropriate mammogram schedule, because there's point to those, right? We're not going to throw baby out with bathwater. But when we're assessing for that true risk and we're assessing for what is the frequency of getting that sort of imaging done, bringing in new technology, bringing in new tests, I think can be very helpful.
Do you know that there's some DNA companies out there that say they test for BRCA, but they only test for BRCA in one population, which is Ashkenazi Jews. So they will tell people you have no BRCA, but if you're not an Ashkenazi Jew, they didn't even look. And again, BRCA is not the be all end all. And so to me, it's disturbing that it is a partial information, but misinformation, and that people go, oh, I don't carry BRCA, therefore I'm safe. I'm fine, I don't have to worry about this. So I think there's way more to it, and be careful of marketing. Marketing is really, really tricky.
Yeah. If you guys have questions about this, you can ping us. We can refer to a few companies that at least we think the marketing hype is less so there. Yeah. I did see within the chat that Vicky has her hands up. So I
Now,
wonder.
were we going to do the PPIs first? Or you're going to
I want
finish
to grab
your...
Vicky and then let's jump to PPIs.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah. So
It actually looks like Vicky has taken her hand down, so we currently have no hands up. So apologies for that.
Oh, okay, excellent. Well, why don't we then jump on to my words are not working, PPIs. Dr. Steph, when someone, and I think let's approach this in two different ways, right? Let's talk about how you wean off, but then also if you're coming in with this incredible reflux, what are some options outside of PPIs, right? And remember, I'm going to remind people sometimes there is a time and a space for them. If you have an ulcer,
absolutely.
PPIs in short course are a very intelligent move because it gives some time and space to heal, right? We're talking about those who've been on it for 20 years. We're also talking about those who want some first-line measures to get to the point so they're not getting ulcers. Okay.
So let's talk about, so PPI is a proton pump inhibitor. And what it does is your body, your stomach, has hydrochloric acid. So it goes in and tells those pumps, don't produce as much acid, because that's when people say, I eat and I feel really uncomfortable. And so the acid production can be too much, and then they can lead to gastric ulcers or some other ulcers. And so people are having this constant gastrointestinal reflux or pain. So they want to shut that acid down. Short term, that's a great solution. And that's what when someone will get a PPI for the first time, I'll say, you must be really uncomfortable. They say, yes, I am. And I'll say, get to the underlying cause. What do you think is causing it? We have no idea. I'm having all this pain. I said, okay, this is designed short course. Some people will end up on a long time just because it shuts the pain down. Well, just because the pain gets shut down doesn't mean you've solved anything. It just means you're no longer in pain. The whole goal is to resolve the underlying problem. The first thing to look at for that is, what are the foods? What are you putting in your body? Either medicine or food or environmental, because the food is the only fuel your body understands. Okay, if it's processed, if it's synthetic, if it's high in acid or high in sugar, those could be causing a lot of that. If you're eating too close to bedtime and lying down, and then a flap goes up. So there are H2 blockers, which would be like a Pepcid or a famotidine. Now that's where I actually did all my clinical research. I did research on Zantac, Tagamet, and we would go into the OR. We would either give someone nothing, or we give them placebo. We'd pull out how much acid was in there and what was the quantity of the acid and the strength of the acid. We would then give them one and see, again, quantity and strength. And we could see that these H1 blockers, H2 is the histamine that you get like rashes and wheezing and hives. And H1 was in the stomach primarily. So an H1 blocker is going to be more short term. Usually the PPIs will last for a whole day, 24 hours. The famotidine right now, because interesting, Zantac was taken off the market. I did some of my research, and then I worked for that company that did Zantac. 20 years later, they said, oops, there's some problems here. That's why these short-term studies or these no studies, and it's like, oh, we're just going to grandfather something in or emergency use something, is a problem. Because we did studies and we saw and we knew, and 20 years later, they still pulled it off the market. So how do you relieve stomach acid? How do you relieve GERD? Or if you've been on a PPI, how do you get off? First of all, natural anti-inflammatories, something like aloe vera gel is very effective. There's something called sucralfate. Sucralfate will coat the stomach lining. If you want to look at something natural that will coat the stomach lining, You can look at marshmallow root, and that will coat the stomach lining. I love marshmallow root. Here's again, folk medicine. Part of my study was pharmacy cognizance, which is the history of a plant and how it came to be a pharmaceutical from a natural. Mustard seed is very effective in squelching like short-term heartburn. So just yellow mustard, like you've got on Memorial Day coming up here in the United States, a big tablespoon of that, pop that down, can coat the stomach and get rid of heartburn immediately. If you've been on a PPI and shut that acid down, when you come off of it, you're going to have a rebound. So you've got to be very, very careful. You've got to look at the milligram strength that you were on. Let's say you've been on a 40 milligram. You may want to go down to a 20 milligram and see how you do. You may want to go down to a 10 milligram and see how you do. You want to titrate down slowly. You didn't get on it overnight. You're not going to get off of it overnight. In addition to that, you've got to look at your underlying cause. What's your lifestyle? What are you eating? What is your stress levels? Generally, it's that you have too little acid and not enough, which is why, excuse me, you're going to have a problem. There is hydrochloric acid, but be very careful of that. I wouldn't start there. I would start with some betaine, betaine. That can help. I love papaya enzymes. Papaya enzymes have natural papaya and bromelain, and those help with digestive issues. Whenever I take something off, I am adding something. Okay, a lot of people just go, I'm just going to stop, and then they crash and they go, oh my God, I didn't know I was doing so much. So you always come down, not even 50%. I like to do 10% or 25%, and then stabilize. It's kind of like I'm a scuba diver. When we do a deep dive, we just don't shoot to the surface. You'll blow your lungs out. Okay. You got to go up 10 feet and you hover for 30 seconds to a minute. You go up another 10 feet and you hover for 30 seconds. You've got to allow the body to recalibrate. So if you're on a 40 milligram, maybe you go to a 20-30 and stay there for a week or two. And if you start getting some acid, maybe you take a famotidine on top of it, or you take some aloe vera on top of it, so that now you've got a regulation. You look, what did I eat that caused the acid? What did I consume? Okay, so I noticed I had a cocktail and that made me burn. Okay, so maybe we're gonna have to pull those cocktails back. Okay, or maybe I ate sugar. I notice that when I have a very satisfying dinner and I have enough protein, that I don't have a craving for sweets afterwards. If I didn't get enough protein and I had too much starch, I'll want sugar after dinner. So I'll say, oh, what's one bite? What's one little, I'll have some cranberries, or I take some nuts and I mix it with some coconut and put it all together, and I'll have one of those. Heartburn. I'm like, okay, that was too much sugar, too close to bed. What can I do? I'll take some papaya enzymes. That'll soothe stuff out. So it really is about slowly coming off, but you've got to pay attention. A lot of people check out on their symptoms or they don't relate them. I want you to keep a journal and say, today I had eggs and I had heartburn. Yesterday I had beef and I did not. Okay, well, that's good. Let's try beef again then and see how you did. Or if you haven't had beef in a long time and you're starting coming down and you can't digest it because you don't have enough protease, take some digestive enzymes along with your meals so that you are breaking those down along with things. And that will help. But it really is go low, go slow, either work with a nutritionist or work with a practitioner if you're struggling or you're having problems. But literally, my biggest advice is go down slowly. You didn't get there overnight, and then you've got to up your gut health. So overall gut health. And I told you that Zach Bush was looking at the microbiome, probiotic foods. I make my own kimchi. I make my own apple cider vinegar. You can do sauerkraut. You can do fermented veggies. a teaspoon of or a tablespoon of those. Populate your gut, get your juices flowing, really helps with that digestion, because you've got to wake your digestion back up. What do you think, Krista? I mean, Dr. Kostroman.
We both know I don't like the doctor title beforehand. I like all of that. The only thing I would add and offer, for say, I really like zinc carnitine as a way to rebuild the stomach, in particular for people who are kind of flirting with that ulcer picture. And separately, I'd offer, there's a really neat study done 10, 15 years ago that looked at people with acid reflux. They gave them 5 milligrams of melatonin before bed, and after 40 days, that went away, right? And really what that melatonin was eventually shown to do is firm up that sphincter, so that thing that separates stomach from esophagus. And so is that something you can experiment with? Should you be experiencing GERD? Sure. I would also really offer that does very specifically speak to how important rest and sleep and other such things are in the development. If hold me honest in this history, but I believe that stomach ulcers and kind of heartburn were one of the first times conventional medicine acknowledged there's a mind-body connection, acknowledged that stress can cause this. And so I don't want that to be neglected as we talk about PPIs and as we talk about heartburn, because it was the first time a very empirical kind of, the body exists alone, the mind's kind of over there in the corner, acknowledged that there was a connection.
So you brought up a really good point. So you have your esophagus, and then you have your cardiac sphincter, which is the flap that goes between the esophagus and the stomach. Interestingly, right between your breasts, nipple level, guy or girl, whatever, on your breastbone, touch in there and see if it's sensitive. If it is, this is an acupressure point that shows you may not have the flap completely down. I want you to go to the left, okay? And you're going to do 30 seconds of a massage, and that literally tells the body, turn that flap and close it. Now, don't go to the right, because that's like winding the drawbridge back up, okay? We want to wind that drawbridge down. And if you will do this, 2 or 3 times in a day, I found people who have chronic GERD are able to get that sphincter to close, and then they don't eat within 3 hours of lying down, and they have so much better results being able to resolve their GERD much more quickly, and they'll see less and less and less discomfort in that area the more that sphincter is learned to stay closed.
I love it, especially touch medicine. I love it. So I know there's been quite a wealth of questions here. I think we have one more. We're gonna give Vicky another chance. Hopefully technology is our friend this evening. Vicky, you're gonna be our last question of the evening.
Thank you. Yes. So both of my parents died of cancer at a relatively early age. And around 6 years ago, I went into a ketogenic diet for that. And I did it for a while, but not really looking at, whether I was in ketosis. And then now when I found out that I also have the ApoE34 gene, I figured I really need the ketogenic diet, but it's been incredibly, like, I can't get into ketosis even with just 10 grams of fat per day, 10 grams of carbs, 160 grams of fat, and like 100 grams of protein. So unless I fast for a day and a half to 2 days, I am like not in ketosis. I don't know what's going on or how to be in it.
So, okay, here's a couple things. I have a client who's very similar to you, and she belongs to a ketosis group. And one of the things that her keto coach told her was, numbers don't live by the numbers. Just like we say, don't live by the scale with weight. We want to look at your body fat versus your muscle ratio. Don't stand on the scale. Weight is not, your friend. So keto numbers are important, or they're a guideline, but they're not the be all end all. what we had to do with my client was we had to give her exogenous ketones to kick her into more ketosis. The question is, are you getting the benefit of the brain clarity, of the fat burning, of the overall energy? Are you feeling the benefits, or are you not? Because if you're getting some of the benefits, but your numbers just aren't in the right range, well, we're all individuals. Your numbers may never hit there. Okay. So tell us a
Right.
bit of how you're doing as far as, are you getting can you tell the benefits of putting yourself there?
I can't tell the benefits,
Okay.
but you know, at the same time, I don't have like a whole lot of symptoms. My main issue really is insomnia. And yes, there is memory. You know, my memory is not as great, especially for names, especially for nouns. I forget those. So I am not seeing I used to be a vegetarian, and when I got my DNA back, I started eating meat just 3 weeks ago because I couldn't have plant proteins. I couldn't have this. I couldn't have kale or spinach. And I'm like, okay, that's not good. So I went on on the ketogenic diet again, like 2 weeks ago. And so I'm still new to it, but it's been incredibly frustrating because I I don't know. I couldn't.
Well, keto's not for everybody. So how did your DNA say that you do processing fats?
Optimal, which is why I decided that this was for me. And it also said intermittent fasting is good. And then the ApoE4 gene and Dr. Dale Bredesen and Dr. Sanderson saying that keto is good for the brain. Plus, my parents died of cancer, and cancer can't live with sugar. Cancer dies when there's no sugar in the body. All of that pointed me to keto, but I don't know how to really stay there. I've been tweaking and I've been extremely strict. Like 10 grams is like extremely strict.
Yeah. Dr. Kosterman, what do you say? I've got a couple other ideas, but I'd rather have your input first.
Yeah. Vicky, have you sat down with a practitioner in the sense of not only reviewing your genes, but kind of the action plan associated to them, plus kind of the health history concerns? Like, have you kind of architect your own current health plan, or have you worked with a practitioner?
I'm working with a practitioner, but it's not for the diet. Like, it's not for this particular question. It's for like toxicity, like detoxing. I got an oat test. I got a gut test, all of that. But she does not know how to help me stay in ketosis. And she
Okay.
told me to work with a nutritionist, but I don't know who and where
Okay.
to go.
But their general advice is that ketosis or the ketogenic diet is the best diet for you, and kind of her advice is kind of find a nutritionist that can support with that transition and find, because it was only 3 weeks ago, correct?
It was like 3 weeks ago when I found out that the plants are not good for me.
Okay.
And I've been a vegetarian all my life, but even like 6 years ago when I did keto, it was really only wild fish and a lot of green leafy vegetables. Now it's like, okay, forget the vegetables for now. Just get into ketosis and come back with the vegetables later.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I would offer one of my thoughts here, and it's not to dismiss you, right? It's more to say there's so many different things I think that need to be considered behind this answer. And I think having one practitioner that oversees it all and really supports the overall direction, I don't know if that's with us or with your other practitioner, I think that would be helpful, because I'm hearing in the course of 3 weeks, there's been a lot of change, right? And I think that by itself can explain a few things, but I would also offer it's going to be really helpful to kind of have one person to walk through this journey with, who kind of is able to see all the pieces. And, you know, even if there needs to be a specialist referred to here and there, they see the results of that and they're able to support with that more comprehensive plan. Yeah.
And do you offer that?
Yeah, we do. We do. So we do have different programs here that we understand the genetic results and we can support that overarching care plan. Absolutely. I
And
think
you also like look at the other tests, right? Like the toxin tests and things like that, the O test.
yeah.
Doctor, I'm going to have Allison reach out to Vicky right away so that we can better support her.
That's a good idea.
Okay.
Yeah. And
I think you've got a long history of your body starting to wake back up. I think you're expecting results probably much more quickly than your body's ready to respond, because the enzyme pathways, and I think you're probably going through some different types of detox, and I think there's going to be an ebb and flow. And I think working with somebody who understands your genetics and can look at the other things is going to be real helpful for you. But good kudos for you to get your test and start to try to make some changes. And, again, kind of like I said, when you take something off, you want to add something up slow. You don't have to go from strict vegetarian or vegan to strict keto. I mean, that's a huge shift, and your body's going to go, what the heck?
That's
So be gentle with yourself.
Scuba diver coming out.
Gentle with yourself. Yeah.
Okay. And for exogenous ketones, do you have a recommendation for what kind or which one?
I like raspberry ketones. I would, a lot of them out there are 300. I would not stay with the 300. I would stay down in more in the 100s, and make them so that you can dose them even multiple times in a day. But you can just go in and search in a search engine, raspberry ketones, and look at some stuff and just look for a quality brand.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
You're so welcome.
All right. There's a few other questions here in the chat that we'll honor people and ensure we get to them. So Marissa is asking, is it best to go gluten dairy free to help prevent, or or the Mediterranean diet, and PRL number is low? Okay. I think the question is kind of what is the best diet suited for her? If I'm reading through the lines, and Marissa, feel free to kind of further flesh out that question. And I guess the first question is, do you have your genes, right? That can sometimes cut through some of the noise, especially with the question of gluten and dairy. Being able to see your HLA, being able to see the gene that deals with dairy sugars, etc., is going to be really, really important. And I think outside of that, it's also a question of what are the health goals? What are the family history, right? Mediterranean is studied as an exceptional diet in regards to cardiovascular wellness and longevity, etc. But as we just heard Vicky, right, there's a lot of evidence that speaks to keto in regards to cancer prevention. And so I would offer it depends on genes, and it depends on your health goals and family histories. And again, I don't mean to shortchange your answer. I think it's just that there's a lot of variables, and this is where a well-informed practitioner can come in and support the selection, and support that. So I hope that's helpful. Dirk in the chat here has offered a very, very interesting question, quite extensive, and one I think if we were to try and address it right now, it'd be a science class and a philosophical discussion unto itself. So Dirk, I see you often coming to these webinars and asking these beautiful questions. My first thought would be, have you enrolled in DNAU, and really explored some of our literature that can really reference some papers that you can dig in deeper, as well as there's a lot of support in the sense of question and answer time, and places, I think, with an academic audience that some of this stuff can be dug into a little bit more intelligently. Unfortunately, we've run over time, and the nature of your question would require at least half an hour, I think, of discussion. So,
well, I think also we have a very active Facebook community, and we encourage all of you to join that. In fact, maybe the powers that be, our little wonderful tech angels, can put in the link, and everybody can go and become a member of the Facebook group. And we're going to start doing more and more question and answers there. And so we would love to have those of you who have specific questions to be able to explore those more, be part of the community. We have tons of DNA practitioners that use DNA in their practice, and they offer great insight. The beautiful thing is DNA continues to evolve, and that our company continues to evolve, and we're having more and more testing and more webinars and more discussions. And we would welcome you to all of those discussions and have you participate in there so that we can all learn together.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. I'm always inspired by some of the questions that we see, because again, I think both you and I think the company in general maintain a humility of we know we don't know it all. And so it's always delightful to get some more of the complex questions, because that allows us to dig into what we don't know and learn together. Yeah, I love that. Lisa has asked if we have any advice on healing or greatly mitigating COPD. Yeah, so pulmonary
Chronic obstructive pulmonary disease.
Thank you. It's the end of my day and my letters and words aren't working anymore. And I guess, Dr. Steph, do you have any really quick thoughts there? I think obviously the answer is, as Lisa says, you've kind of already heard it. There's definitely an element of you want to work with a practitioner, because I think with such a condition that took a while to develop and is so compromising of quality of life, it's going to be really important that you have someone who can suggest something and monitor that, because you don't want that to be left alone in a vacuum. That's my first blush at it. Dr. Steph, do you have any?
Well, I think two things. I used to have a lot of asthma, and I told you I had a lot of allergies. What I found is mine were directly related to sugar. It's interesting. I have an aunt who lived on white bread and Velveeta cheese and Pepsi, and had horrible asthma, had horrible respiratory ability and pulmonary function tests. And when she got off of the starches and the sugars, the COPD or her asthma and stuff got better. COPD, if you imagine little grapes, the alveoli open up and there isn't as much surface area. So that is very difficult, not knowing your history, not knowing what caused it, not knowing how extensive it is. But you've got to think decreased inflammation, you've got to think increased lubrication, and you've got to think increased oxygenation. And an element that a lot of people don't know about, molecular hydrogen really helps, as well as germanium is a really unusual mineral that really helps with oxygen exchange. So that's something to think about.
Love that. I actually didn't know about the germanium. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Appreciate it. All right. Deborah's asking her last question of the evening. The answer is yes, I'll offer that, but I would offer we'll probably also have to link to a few other webinars, because it's something that we've definitely explored in other webinars and we wouldn't do it justice in a sentence or two. So Deborah's asking, how do you use HRT, which means hormone replacement therapy, to regulate estrogen? And I know, Dr. Steph, the first inclination you have there is add an extra letter. What extra letter would you add in?
B, bioidentical hormone replacement.
Yeah. And so the short answer is yes, it's a complex, there's going to be some testing required and some nuance as to what that prescription looks like and how you go about getting it. I know we did a webinar, 3 weeks ago, Steph? I don't do
Yeah, 3 weeks or a month. We've done a couple now on specifically BHRT, which you should really go back, watch those, and then come back with some of those questions.
Yeah. So it's not to dismiss your question there. It's just an acknowledgement that the answer to that we scratched the surface over the course of 90 minutes. And so your few minutes now wouldn't do it honor. But I think Dr. Steph, to spoiler alert, you'll learn this in the webinar, is a huge advocate for BHRT and sees a huge role in the regulation and support of estrogen. Yeah. So I really enjoyed our time here today, Dr. Steph. I love being able to talk through demystifying what cancer is, stripping some of the fear, and offering people tangible things that they can be doing to kind of support that journey, because it's not one I think anyone is ever ready to undertake, and it's one we all have a small, reasonable fear of having to undertake. So thank you for your time and thoughts today.
Absolutely. And I thank you for everyone who's here and everyone who stayed and everyone who, if you got one idea out of here on how to improve your health or improve some of your family's health, that's the most important thing. What you think about, you bring about. Gratitude is huge. You've got a community here to support you and make sure you you really wrap that community in. And the most important thing is, don't be afraid to get answers, because then you can be proactive. And so while there's a lot of information, it's also, step by step by step, and make the best decision you can with each thing. And you'll be in our thoughts and prayers, and we're glad you were here. Thank you so much.
Thank you all very much. Great job, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Bye-bye. Au revoir.
Woohoo.